Okay, sorry, a bit of a late start today. We're going to finish up sort of pure JavaScript today. On Friday, we're going to be moving on to another application of JavaScript, a really important application of JavaScript. But for today, we're going to be looking at some more events that you can handle using JavaScript. Up until now, all we've handled is click events. We're going to be looking at some more today. So there are lots more that you can handle using JavaScript. You can handle, so obviously we've got click. You can handle a double click. You can even get more specific and do like mouse down versus mouse up. So you know, if you if you attach a mouse up event handler to an event, if you mouse down on it, nothing will happen, and nothing will happen until you release the mouse, and then the event will fire, for example. You can also handle key presses, key down, key press, key up. Load is the window onload event. You can also handle an event when something gets changed, like for example when somebody changes a value in a text field, or changes a radio button, or changes a selection, things like that. So there are lots of different events that you can handle using JavaScript. Inside each event handler, so we've been attaching event handlers to things by saying that thing dot on click equals some function. And inside that function, inside that event handler, the this keyword refers to the thing that we attached our event handler to. So for example, in this case, we're attaching the function booyah to two separate objects. We're attaching it to a text box and to submit. We're saying on mouse out, when we mouse out of the text box, we're going to call booyah, and when we mouse out of the when you click on the submit, we're also going to do booyah. So it's the same function that we're attaching to two separate objects, and in each of them, all we say is this dot value equals booyah. So you can see I moused over that, and it put booyah into this. This is the object that we were attached to. So I'm attaching booyah to via on mouse out, we're attaching it to this text box thing. If we click save, then it puts booyah in the value of the submit button instead. This refers instead to this thing right there that we attached ourselves to. So yeah. Sorry, this inside of the function booyah always refers to the object that we attached ourselves to. So in the case of text box, it's the text box. In the case of submit, it's submit. So this can also, so this refers to our properties as well as methods. So properties are just basically just variables attached to an object. So DOM objects have various properties, various variables you can change the values of. They also have methods, so you can call a method on this if you want to. This being whatever object you're attached to. By default, I mentioned this before, by default all code runs in the global scope, and everything in the global scope actually gets attached to the window object. So there's the window global object that refers to the window that we're in, and anytime you declare a global variable or a global function, it just becomes a property or a method of the window object. Which is another really important reason why we have the, remember we looked at the IFI, the self-containing function, so that we don't declare anything in the global scope. We wrapped our entire code in a self-executing, not self-executing function, and immediately invoking function expression, or IFI, that prevents us from declaring any global scope variables. So this is another important reason why we do that. This also allows you to eliminate lots of redundancy. For example, if you have 3 different radio buttons and we want to alert which one of them is checked, in our process ducks function, if we attach process ducks to each of these, we say document.getElement by ID Huey dot on change equals process ducks, and document.getElement by ID Dewey dot on change equals process ducks, and so on. Or actually, we could, in this case, what we could do is get elements by name. That's probably a better way of doing this. Get elements by name ducks, and then iterate over those, iterate over each of those, and for each one of those, say, that element dot on change equals process ducks. Anyhow, so we attach this process ducks event handler to each of these radio buttons. When we select any one of them, rather than figuring out which one of these things is checked by doing 3 different document.getElementByIDs to figure out which one of them is checked, we can just say this dot value. This dot value refers to whichever one we clicked on. So we can say, there we go, Dewey is checked, Louise checked, Dewey is checked. So we're attaching this function to 3 different things. Each separate thing gets its own copy that gets attached to the radio button object. The event object. The event object is something that gets passed to an event handler function. We haven't been using this yet. We haven't been accepting this event handler yet. But so this is an event handler. If we just sort of copy this over, technically, for every event handler, there is this event object that gets passed as the first parameter. In JavaScript, you don't have to accept parameters if you don't want to. Parameters can get passed that you don't capture. By adding this variable here, I'm capturing that event object that automatically gets passed. And inside of this, I can make use of this event object. This event object has several properties and methods. So we're going to take a look at those. Event.type, so event.type will refer to the type of event it was: click, mouse down, mouse move, submit, key up, things like that. We can figure out what event it was. Target, the element on which the event occurred. So most often, event.target is equal to this. Inside of this, target is equal to this inside of an event handler. That's not always the case, and I'm actually kind of fuzzy on when it's not the case, but it's not always the case. Timestamp when the event occurred, that allows you to keep track of timing between different events and so on. Mouse-related events, we've seen all those so far. Click, double-click, mouse down, mouse up. Obviously, click is a combination of mouse down and mouse up. So basically after the mouse up. Mouse over, mouse out, mouse move. Mouse over happens when, there's an element on the page. As soon as I move the mouse within its boundaries, that's a mouse over. And when I move the mouse out of its boundaries, that's a mouse out. Yeah, that's a good point. She said it's common practice to attach to mouse up or to mouse click or to click instead of to mouse down, so that if you accidentally click on the wrong spot, you can just move your mouse away and nothing will happen. The event object also has several other properties. So if it's a mouse event that occurred, there will be properties that indicate where on the screen, the coordinates on the screen where it occurred. So where did the click occur? So client X, client Y are coordinates inside the browser window. So the browser window, let's see. So this image over here specifies which is which. So the browser window. So this is sort of like the internal area of the page where you see the HTML body, right? So not including any of the browser Chrome. And then screen is so that would be up all the way to the top of my screen, all the way to the left, bottom, left, right, and bottom. So left, right, and bottom right now are the same, are the same places as the left, right, and bottom boundaries of the client, but the top is going to be different there. Let's see. And then page X, so you can imagine that I might have a page where some of it is scrolled off screen upwards. Page X, or page X and page Y encompass the entire width and height of the page. So client Y could possibly be less than page Y. So page Y measures all the way to the top of the body tag. Anyhow, and then offset Y is a non-standard one that that indicates where within a particular element you are. Button indicates which mouse button was pressed. You could do left, middle, and right buttons, and actually, I think oftentimes the scroll wheel is considered 2 buttons. If you scroll up, that's considered like button 4, and scroll down is button 5 or something like that. So if you want to handle scrolls manually using button, you can do that. Another example, let's see, of mouse moving. This will indicate different coordinates on the screen when I mouse over this area. And as I move the mouse, it gets continually updated. So mouse move fires as soon as I've moved the mouse a little bit. The browser, when it fires events, it only checks, every few milliseconds or so. It doesn't like every pixel or something. It doesn't fire a mouse move event. It'll sort of, it might take a little while, like a couple milliseconds, for the browser to fire another event. So you could move really quickly and have like only 2 events fire, like one event fire at the beginning and one event fire at the end. You might have moved 100 pixels or something. Let's see. So yeah, so screen is, so the X coordinate and the Y coordinate are the same right now because the left is flush with the edge of the screen. But the top is different because there's the difference between here and here. The difference between the top of my screen up here and the top of the body up there. But if I like move the left side in, then now I can see the left of the screen and the left of the client are different. Okay, so that's mouse coordinates. What happens with the button? Oh, okay, so when I click button 0, button 0 is left mouse button. If I right click, that's button 2, and I don't have a middle click because the Mac, we don't have middle clicks, so we can't see that one. But if you have a scroll mouse, then you can see that. Yeah. Oh, okay, so window to unload equals function, target equals document take alone by the target, target to on mouse move equals target to on mouse down equals show chords. Oh, so this is, we're doing 2 assignments in one here. Actually, so this is sort of a chained assignment. You can do this, instead of saying target.onMouseMove equals show coordinates, semicolon, new line, target.onMouseDown equals show chords. You're assigning the same thing to each one. You can say target.onMouseDown equals show chords, and then the result of that is show chords also, which gets assigned into mouse move. So that's kind of cool. If you need to assign the same thing to multiple variables, you can just do this sort of chain kind of thing. This variable is kind of confusingly named here, actually, because there's also the event.target. This is separate from that. This is just something on the screen has been given an ID of target, and so we're putting that into a variable called target and then assigning mouse move to that. But then like event.target inside of this function will be will actually be this element. The same element is called target. That's kind of confusing. Okay, keyboard and text events. When we click in a text box or we tab to a text box, that event is called focus, and we can see that an element gets focused by the browser kind of highlights it. And the opposite of that is blur, when it loses focus, which I guess the analogy is, I can follow the analogy, but it's kind of a weird name. So when I click on that, it gets a focus event. When I move away from it, it gets a blur event, and I can tab to, and I can do also key up and key down and key press. I can't type any text there, so I can't see the select because I can't type any text. But anyhow, so this over here is keeping track of all the events that have occurred. It's keeping track of the keys that I've pressed. That's the meta key. That's the command key, option key, or alt, control. anyhow, I'm just pressing a bunch of keys. And so just as with mouse events, you can do key down, key up, and key press differently. Key press is the combination of down and up. Key code. There's a little bit of confusion surrounding key code. So sometimes, I believe it's in key press. Key press uses key code. The value put into key code is an actual. So that's the ASCII integer value of the key that was pressed. So you can convert that to the actual character that you see using string.from_char code. But when you do, I believe it's key down or key up. I believe this is different. This is actually like a number indicating like which key was pressed on the keyboard, and the keyboard, every key is assigned a number, which is different from its ASCII value. So using this can be a little bit tricky. At any rate, there are also these Alt key, Control key, Shift key properties that are each going to be true. They're just flags that are going to be true if that key was held down at the same time. So if let's see if this does that. So that, and if I do like H or something, so it said key press H, and the meta key was also enabled. So what I did was Command H. So we had meta key, we had H, and meta key was also selected. Yeah. So anyhow, so you can figure out which modifier keys were held down at the time of the event. Key event example. So we have a text box here. We can say on key down equals this function, and inside this function we examine the event object that gets passed as a parameter to see what the key was that was pressed, and we can also check to see whether the Alt key was pressed. So in this example, we're getting the key that was pressed, so this is like going to be an A or an S or a Q or whatever, and we're checking to see if it was S and the Alt key was pressed, then maybe we want to save the document. Actually, probably wouldn't want to do that on Alt. I think it's usually Control, right? So this should probably be Control key, or on the Mac. And if we determine that the user is on a Mac, then we probably want to do meta key. Meta is the command key. So if I do Alt S in this, then it alerts save the document. Some useful key codes. Event.keycode will sometimes be something different. It'll be like 8 or 9 or 13 or 27 for like these special keys, like backspace, tab, enter, escape. There's a key code for every like thing that you press on the keyboard. So you can differentiate between a lot of useful things. You can make things happen when you use like the arrow keys, stuff like that. Page and window events. Context menu is an event for like if you right click and you get a pop-up menu. That's what that is. Let's see, load and unload. We've done something with window.onload. That's when the page finishes loading. Unload is actually very useful sometimes. It's fired just before you're about to leave the page. So you click a link, you like hit the browser's back button. You do something that causes the browser to go away from the page. Just before it goes away from the page, it fires this unload event. Resize is when we resize the window. Scroll is when we scroll, and so on. Form submission events. If we have an actual form, a form tag wrapped around some stuff, we can capture the form before it gets submitted and, for example, prevent the form from actually being submitted to like some server-side PHP script. This can be really useful sometimes if we want to just sort of handle the form ourselves in JavaScript. So the form submit event, so if we have a form on screen that's called like, form ID equals foo, then in our JavaScript we can say document.get element by ID foo dot on submit equals function whatever. And if we accept this event, we'll call this something else. We'll say on submit, oops, equals capture, function capture. This will accept a, of course this all has to be in a window.onload equals function window.onload equals function something. Inside of this, what we can do is function capture. We can say we can prevent the form from being submitted by saying prevent default and stop propagation. These are two methods that we can run on the event object that will prevent the event from occurring. So prevent the browser from doing what it would normally do in the case of this event. So in the case of a browser submission, we'll just say event.prevent default, event.stop propagation. And both of these, the combination of the two of these will prevent the form from actually being submitted to the server. So in the normal event, when you click a submit button, the browser packages up all the data in the form and sends it as parameters to the server. We will prevent that request from happening. So we will not navigate away from this page. This is also really useful for capturing clicks on links, for example. If you want to capture the click event on a link and make the browser not actually navigate to that link, you can do the same thing by saying, .on click equals capture. If we have a ID equals foo, href equals something, then in this case we will capture the click event on the foo link, prevent it from actually navigating to that page. Yeah.
So if you want, if this is like a temporary block or something, because why would you create it as a link?
Yeah. Well, what we would normally probably do is we would sort of channel that into doing something else. What we're going to start learning on Friday is called Ajax. We might actually load that page using a different technique. Rather than actually navigating to that page using the browser, we can fetch that page sort of behind the scenes and inject its content into the page instead. So there are different ways that we can, different reasons why we might want to capture the click event on links and prevent them from actually going through. Another one is if we want to make sure that this opens in a new window, then we can capture the click event on this, prevent it from happening, and then just open a new window that we specify to load that page. So that's one thing that we can use to capture the click event for. So this is an example of capturing the submit event. This is pretty much what we just did. So eventually we're going to get to an issue. If we attach a lot of event handlers to a lot of different things, we're going to get to the point where we're going to run into problems. We might have, for example, we might have two different JavaScript files that we're writing, and each of those JavaScript files needs to do something when the page is finished loading. So they both need to do something on the window.onload event. If the first JavaScript file says window.onload equals some function, and then the second JavaScript file says window.onload equals some function, then the second JavaScript file overrides the first so that the onload event will only fire the second JavaScript file's onload event and not the first one's. We're overriding the contents of the onload property. So if we want to attach multiple events to this, multiple handlers to the same event, what we need to do is use a different approach. It's called add event listener. And in fact, from now on, you should use this for all events that you attach. This is to prevent multiple event handlers from overriding each other. you can attach multiple event handlers to the same object. So if we have this button here, so document get element by ID my button, I can attach an event listener to that for click that runs function 1, and then I can attach another event listener for click that runs function 2. So both of these functions will get called when the button is clicked. It's probably not as important as essential to do this for like click events, for example, but definitely it's very important to do this for the window onload event. So that if you have multiple JavaScript files, all of the JavaScript files will have their onload events actually be executed. You're not going to override any previous JavaScript files. So that's really important. So from now on, we'll be using this instead of this. Okay, so let's just modify our code from Wednesday a little bit. I want to do just a couple of things. On Wednesday, we created this rects. What's that? Yeah, sorry, Monday. Yes, it's Wednesday, right? Exactly. So Monday we did this, and we click the color button. It'll randomly color each rect. When we load the page, it randomly creates 200 of them and just randomly scatters them throughout the page. When we click move, it'll randomly scatter them again. So that's fun. But what I want to do is I want to add a text box here, so that anytime I type a number into the text box, it'll and click add, it will add that many more rects to the area here. So let's modify this a little bit. So again, we have our rect.html. File, and this has the div with ID of rectangle area. That's the overall area here where we're putting all the rectangles. Then we have the color button and the move button. I want to add a text area here, so I'm going to say input type equals text, and I'm going to give it an ID of number. I'll say placeholder equals add number of rects to add. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say add rects. No. Do I want to do that? Okay, I'm getting into UI design here. I'll just say input type equals submit value equals add rects. There we go. Okay, so in order for one of the great things about having a form and a submit button is that if you have well, let's refresh this page here. So if we have the focus on here and I type a number here, when I hit enter, I don't have to actually click the button. When I hit enter, the browser automatically fires the submit event on this form. So normally using JavaScript, we don't actually need to use an actual form tag, even though we're using form control elements. And in fact, in your homework 5 and your homework 6, or sorry, homework 5 you're using form submissions, but your homework 6, you're expressly forbidden from using a form, even though you're actually using form elements. So, but the great thing about adding a form sometimes is that you can just hit enter. So it allows you to just hit enter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a form, even though technically I don't actually need it. I'm going to give it an ID of add form. I'm going to put this stuff inside of it. So I have the number, and then I have the submit value. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to capture the submit event on that form and do something else instead. I'm just going to add the rectangles when that button is clicked or enter is hit in that text box or whatever. So up here I'm going to say document.getElement by ID add form dot on submit equals add rects. But again, so we want to migrate away from using these .onClick, .onClick, .onSubmit. And in fact, this we should adapt as well. So we're going to do something else. We're going to say window.add event listener. We're going to listen for the load event. And when that happens, we should run this function. We're going to have to add a right paren there to close the parameters. So notice that we're passing this anonymous function as the second parameter to this function here. Okay. So we'll do that, and we can also say .add event listener click. For each of these, we basically just remove the click. We add a comma, close the method call, basically. Click, color rects. Event listener submit. Add rects. Okay, so this is how we're going to be attaching event handlers from now on. So when the submit event happens, we're going to add rects. So what we're going to do here, let's see. So create rects is actually the function that creates rects. So so we just want to call create rects. No, we'll rename this add rects. Add rects, and so maybe by default we'll add 100 rects or 50. We'll make this parameterized, add rects, num, and then what we can do is, let's see. So when we want to call this add rects, and we want to pass to it a parameter that indicates the number that we should add. But the number that we should add comes from this thing right here that I input with ID of number. So there are a couple different ways that we can do this. The only real way that we can do this is we have to add an intermediate function that will call this function and pass the correct number. So actually what I'm going to do is create rects. I'm going to revert this, create rects. And we will call this add rects, and function add rects. What this will do is this will say document element by ID number. I'm going to parse that as an int, parse int, and I'm going to call create rects. So add rects has no other function but to get the number in the text box and pass that number to create rects. We'll say create num rects. And then the last thing we need to do, so we also need to capture the event object here and prevent this form from being submitted. So this is an event handler that is being attached to the submit event. So in order to prevent that from happening, then we say event.prevent default and event.stop propagation. There we go. Yeah. What's that? Yeah. So every time we'll add that many squares. Oh right. Oh sorry. Yes. Num. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. You're right. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so when we refresh the page, it should only have 50 rects, okay? And then what we can do is we can say, add 50 more. Oh, okay. Work. Let's add rects. Nothing's happening. No errors, nothing. Okay, so what's going on here? Add rects. Let's add an alert. Foo. Alert foo. Excellent. Var num equals parseInt document to go by. Oh, what's our problem here? Yeah, we need to get the thing inside the text box. We're trying to parse a DOM object as an int, so we can't do that. Dot value. Okay. This would probably return nan. Alert num. Remove this foo. Right. I'm gonna alert this to see what it is. I think it's gonna be nan. Yeah. Nan stands for not a number. So dot value. Add 50 rects. Is it adding? It's not adding. Alert num 50. No, I don't. Oh, yeah. Okay, it did. Okay, so it's adding. Okay, what's our new problem? It's adding them in the same spot. Okay. So we're going to have to. Let's see. Okay. This is gonna be kind of tricky because I want to only place the ones that I just added. It's gonna be tough. So I specify the random positioning when we do move rects. So move rects fetches all of the rects in the area and moves them. But I want to add new ones, and each of them at different locations. So what I'm going to do, well, what I want to do is I want to add the new ones at new random locations, but I want to retain the previous ones at their existing locations. But then still, when I click move, then it will move them all. So let's do this. Create rects. Create rects will
Can you give the temporary value to the ones that you just created and then call move recs on just those?
why don't we do why don't we when we create a rect, we'll give it a random location. We can say give random location rect, and then what we can do is from inside move rects, we can just say give random location rects bracket I. So this is what we can do, and then we can say function give random location. This is going to be a DOM object. Well, we'll call it rect. So we're going to give this a random location. Okay. So when we refresh the page, everything still gets created with new random locations. When we add rects 50, they get added in new random locations. Excellent. We can color them all. We can move them all. Perfect. No, it'll recolor them. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to the last thing here. The last thing is called timers, because timers is very important. We're going to be using this in the next homework assignment, which is out today. Timers are basically sort of like an alarm clock. You can set a countdown to, for a certain number of milliseconds, and after that certain number of milliseconds, it'll call a function for you, which is pretty great. You can sort of delay the execution of a function for a couple seconds or a couple milliseconds or however long you want. So in order to do that, use a function called setTimeout. The first parameter is the function that you want it to call, and the second parameter is the delay. So after this delay, it will call this function. Pretty great, pretty straightforward. If this will only do it once. If you want to do the same thing multiple times repeatedly after a certain delay, with this delay in between, then you would use a set interval. So that sets an interval timer. In order to prevent a timer from continuing in order to stop it. Then you use clear timeout and clear interval. And what these do is these take a parameter, which is the ID of the timer that you had set that you want to clear. And these are actually returned by set timeout and set interval. So what you'd normally do is you'd say something like, well, we have an example here. We don't have an example. Here we go. This is an example of clearing a timer. We'll create a global variable here that's called timer. And when we call set interval, we put its return value into timer. So we're remembering the value that set interval returned. That value is sort of a unique identifier for that particular timer. We set that particular timer. In order to clear that particular timer, we need to give this value to clear interval. So later on, we're going to call clear interval, and we're going to give it that. Basically, what this function does is every other time we call click me, it'll set an interval timer to call this function Rudy every second. Or it will, if that timer is running, it will stop it. So when we click me, every second it'll say Rudy, Rudy. And when we stop, it won't say it anymore. So that's pretty cool. So why don't we adapt our code here to do something even cooler. What I want to do is when I click color, I want to repeatedly change the colors for about a second or 2 seconds or 5 seconds or something. But like every 50 milliseconds or something. It'll just like do like psychedelic for like three seconds or so. So when I click color rects, maybe what I want to do is instead of calling color rects, so color rects will just go through and color all of them, but maybe what I want to do is instead of doing that, calling that directly, I'll say go psychedelic. And then our function go psychedelic. What this will do is this will, so we want to do two things. We want to repeatedly every 50 milliseconds call color rects. Okay. So how would we do that? Every 50 milliseconds. Set interval. And then the first parameter is the function that we want to call. Color rects. Do I add parentheses here or not? No, I don't. This is, again, we're passing the function as a parameter, and when we pass a function as a parameter, we're saying here's the function that you should call. Here, I'm giving you this function. Then later on, set interval will add the parentheses to actually call it. Yeah.
What if the function you want to call takes in parameters?
We'll see that in a sec. We'll see that in a sec. That's a really good question. So let's see. So every 50 milliseconds, I'm going to change the colors. Yeah, so I need to say var timer equals this so that I can clear this later on. So I only want to do this for maybe 3 seconds or so. And then after those 3 seconds, I want to stop this. So we're going to actually be using a combination of set interval and set timeout. So in order to stop this after 3 seconds, I'm going to have to use set timeout. So I can say set timeout stop psychedelic after 3,000 milliseconds. But in order to, let's see, so in order to clear this particular timer, I need to give this value to stop psychedelic. Stop psychedelic's gonna do function stop psychedelic. We'll do clear timeout of some timer ID here. We need to accept the timer ID, timer ID. But in order to pass it to stop psychedelic, how do we go about doing that? Well, there are a couple different ways that we can do that. Most browsers support this approach. So obviously we can't just say stop psychedelic timer, right? Because that will call stop psychedelic right now. We want it to call stop psychedelic after 3,000 milliseconds. And adding parentheses calls it immediately. So we can't do that. There are two ways that we can do it. One is that we can add additional parameters after the milliseconds here. We can say timer, and that will be passed as the browser just looks for any additional parameters here, and if there are any additional parameters, it will pass them to stop psychedelic, to the function that we call when it calls it. So that's one way that we can do it. Another approach is that we can instead of calling stop psychedelic, we can call an anonymous function that in turn will call stop psychedelic and pass in timer. Okay? So both of these approaches are equally valid. I'd argue that the first may be a little bit cleaner, but this one will work in all browsers. Older versions of IE don't support the first way. Not that you should really be focused too much on supporting old IE, but I don't know. I kind of like the idea of passing an anonymous function that will do this. So this anonymous function here is the function that gets passed to set timeout. After 3,000 milliseconds, it'll call that anonymous function. And what does that anonymous function do? It calls stop psychedelic and passes the timer. Okay, so let's try that. Okay, so we can add some, oh, let's get rid of that alert, annoying alert. Alert. Add recs, color. Oh, it's not stopping. We have an error. Clear timeout is, oh, clear Tim out. Clear Tim out. Get out, Tim. We don't want Tim. Oh, there we go. Clear timeout timer ID. So that is, was that 3 seconds? It was? Yeah. Okay. Felt like longer.
Did it get rid of them? Like you added 50, right?
No, well, every time I refresh the page, it only adds 50 when I start. So we'll add 100 or so more, and then we'll color everything. There we go. Sure, let's make it awesome. Let's make it every 10 milliseconds. 500. Add them.
Oh my god.
I don't think the browser is actually keeping up. It's chugging on that one. Yeah. If we add only like, 150 more, I think it'll probably, there we go. That's a little better. Okay, so that's an approach to using timers. I want to quickly do one more quick example. I want to do an alarm. So we have these text boxes here. I'm going to enter a number of minutes and a number of seconds, and after that, an alarm will go off. We'll just like alert. So let's do that. 17 alarm. So we have just this HTML page. We have a min, a sec, and a go. Let's create our JavaScript file, alarm.js. And what we're going to do here, so we'll start with, let's be really good about this. Actually, we should probably adapt the other one to do this too, but I'll do that later. Let's be really good about this and wrap this whole thing in an IFI. So we'll do this properly. Function, paren, blah, blah, blah. Call that, and then inside of here, we'll create all of our quote-unquote global variables and functions. So let's say window dot add event listener load. We'll listen for the load event, and when that happens, we will do this function. This function is going to attach a click handler to Go. So we can say document.get element by ID Go dot add event listener. Click will be start countdown. Okay, and down here we'll declare a function start countdown. Function start countdown, and what this will do is this will begin to count down the number of minutes and seconds. Actually, you know, I think what I'll do right now is we'll ignore minutes for now, and we'll just do seconds. And when I hit go, I want to, like, if I type 50 seconds in here, I want to every second change this to 49, 48, 47, 46, and once this reaches 0, then I want to, you know, do something funky, go crazy. So let's see, start countdown. What we want to do is we want to get the value in the seconds box. So we can say document.get element ID sec, and we need to get its value inside of there, right? Vlu. Parse that as an int. And then we will say, so var sex equals, and then we want to, every second, we want to have a function decrement. And this will get the value there. Decrement it. And put it back into the value. Value equals that minus 1. Okay, so this is going to happen every second. So we want to set an interval timer to do that. So set interval decrement 1000 every second. Okay, let's try that out. So 50, go. 49, 48, 47, and so on. So let's refresh this and do like 3, 2, 1, 0, -1, -2. So we don't want that to happen, right? So how do we make this stop once we hit 0? We can do an if else. So maybe where do we put the if else? Here. In decrement? Yeah, in decrement is where we know when we hit 0, right? Yeah, if. So let's see, if, we can just say if sex equals 1, then we would be putting 0 in there, and so we just need 1, 0. Actually, we only want to 0, like there has to actually be a second where 0 is there, right? So yeah, so when it's 0, then we want to stop. Yeah, so it'll be 1 and then 0, and then it'll be 0 for a second, right? Do we want it to be 0 for a second, or do we want to stop exactly when it hits 0? Right at 0? Okay, so we need to do this at 1 then, because this will be 0. We're decrementing that to 0, so then we'll stop. How do we stop it? No, well, so this function still is running, and this function sets it to that minus, it sets it to 1 minus 1.
So there'll be 1 second between when it turns 0 and the alarm goes off.
No, there would be that if we made this 0. Yeah. Okay. So how do we stop it? we need the timer ID in order to stop it, right? We need to say clear interval to stop it, and we need the timer ID. Where do we get the timer ID from? I see lots of mumbling. So we get it from here, right? We say like var timer equals this. So set interval returns the ID that we need in order to clear that particular thing. This particular thing we need to stop from happening. In order to stop it, we pass the ID into this. That's because like we might have several interval timers running or several like just regular timers running. How do we know precisely which one to stop? Well, set interval returns a value here. This precise value is what we need to pass into clear interval in order to prevent this exact thing from happening. So we save it in a timer. We will pass it here, timer. In order for us to get access to it over here, though, we need to make it a global variable. So up here we'll say var timer equals null. Again, and then up here, I mean, this isn't a global variable. This isn't going to be a property of window now. Remember I said that every global variable actually becomes a property of window. This is a pseudo global variable. All of this stuff will actually go away once this function, this iffy, gets executed, which is good practice. Okay, so once it hits 0, we're going to clear the interval timer. It still goes to 0. And then we'll like alert, woo, still running. 3, 2, oh, uh-oh. Oh no, whoops, we only want to do that. We only want to do that if we, okay, let's decrement there. Okay, here we go. 0, there we go. Clear interval, woo, okay. 3. Wait, why aren't you alert, woo? Okay, that's still running, but it's not decrementing. Oh. I have to do that? I might have to do that. All right, there we go, cool. Okay, I'll see you guys on Friday.
So what's the difference between making that a full variable and just passing it through in that weird framework that you showed us, like just passing a blank function?
That's a great point. Actually, we could just do that. That's that actually would probably be a better approach. What you could do is
You would do the decrement. You
var timer equals function decrement timer parens, and then timer clear interval timer. Let's do that. Oops. Lectures.
So it worked.
Yep, there you go. Awesome.
Have a good one.
Yeah. Let's
So homework